Welcome to a Christmas computer build. Today we're using parts that we found on a Black Friday special here in Australia. So it's a pretty budget Ryzen system. So there's no high-powered video cards, stuff like that. It's going to be used mainly as a workstation. So to start with, we're going to list the parts. We've got the Ryzen 3 2200G processor. This has built-in Vega graphics, so no need for a video card with this. For memory, we have the, what is this? GL Evo Spear. I've never used this memory before, but let's hope that it's decent. The processor, the motherboard, and the SSD I have used before. So this motherboard, sorry, is the Asus Prime A320M-E. I've used the K variant of this board, sorry, and I've used the 1200G of this, so the older one without graphics. And then our SSD is the Corsair Force LS 60 gig. It's a SATA 3 SSD. It's an older one, but it still works. And like I said, this is not a high-powered system, so it doesn't need anything ridiculous. The case, I'm actually going to have to look at the box here. It's the Cooler Master CMP501, and it has a power supply inbuilt. So that's going to help us quite a bit in simplifying the build of this system. For tools, I'm going to be using a ratcheting screwdriver with a Phillips number 2 bit. It's made by Snap-on. Nothing ridiculously special in the way of tools here. We've got some zip tie cutters as well and some sort of knife to open boxes. Don't have to use anything special there. Scissors will do the job as well. I do have a socket set here as well. Hopefully we won't have to use this, but we may need a 5mm socket later on in the build. So to start, I'm going to grab the motherboard and I'm going to open up the box and pull it out here. I'm going to grab out the I/O shield. We'll need that for later. We've got manuals and whatever that is. I've never... that's... So if you're using an M.2 drive, which is a new type of flash media, it's a very fast SSD, you'd stick this into the mounting hole and it helps you pull it out afterwards. So that's something neat that they included. And like I said, there's manuals and warranty and all that stuff we don't need. And in this little tab here, if we pull them out, there are SATA cables, the data cables for them. We'll need them for later, so we'll put them with the I/O shield. And now we're going to take out the motherboard from the box, set it on the table here, and put this box back together. We're going to be building this motherboard up on the box. So here's the motherboard. It's in an anti-static bag. There's a lot of rumors flying around about these bags. There's nothing dangerous about setting the board on the bag. I'm not going to do that just for safety in the comments. I mean, people always think they're right. So touch your case before you touch your motherboard. Slip your hand in the bag and you'll want to touch it by the plastic bits and the back plate there. So you see that? I put 2 fingers on the back and my thumb on one of the plastic PCI brackets. It doesn't matter if you're touching the side, there's nothing there that you can hurt, but then I just set that down on the box. The reason I'm not putting it straight on the counter, you could do that, but there's a heap of very sharp solder joints there and it will scratch up your counter really good if you put it straight down. Otherwise, set it on the bag. It doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt anything. The inside of the bag's not made from anything different than the outside of the bag. So I hope that's sorted and people aren't going to, you know, say stuff in the comments that's not true. So, taking a look around the board, the main things that we're interested in today is our CPU socket. This is an AMD socket for the, I believe it's FM4, if I'm not mistaken, socket FM4. This box, I can't see if it says it. We'll call it that. It says here socket 1331, but anyway, I think it's an FM4. This is a PGA socket, I believe. Yeah, PGA socket. So the pins are actually on the processor, not in the socket, so you can touch this no problem. Try not to get dirt and stuff in there because it may cause issues. But yeah, that's our CPU socket. Next to it here, to the right, is the RAM sockets. 2 of them on this board, and I believe we've got 2 sticks. Yes, we do. You can see there, we've got 2 sticks of RAM. Otherwise, we've got the 2 main power ports. You've got your 24-pin main motherboard power and your 4-pin supplemental CPU power. We've got a USB 3 port here. We've got USB 2 here, and I believe one of these is audio. I believe it's that one. We've got our front panel ports down here and our SATA ports here, and they're the main things we're going to be interested in today. If you're building a gaming system, this here is a PCI Express port and you'd be using that for a video card. But since we don't have one of those, it's not going to be an issue for today. And on the side here, this is what pokes out the back of your case. This is all your ports that are going to be on the back of your motherboard. So you've got PS2 for your old style keyboard and mice. You've got your video ports here, USB. One of them is an odd green color. I'm assuming that either means it's... Oh no, it says right here on the board. You might be able to see that, I'm not sure. USB 3.1, so that's why this board is the E variant and not the K variant. I'm assuming that's what's different. It supports USB 3.1, which is a faster standard than USB 3.0. But otherwise, getting back to it, we've got gigabit LAN and our speaker ports. So, now that that's out of the way, we're going to take our processor box, which is a ridiculous size because that's our processor there. So that's probably just larger than an inch square. So we're going to cut the label here. Now, AMD, I don't agree with this. You actually have to cut the data label to get into your CPU box, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you have to claim this on warranty, all your data is there. So if you try to pull that off with your finger, you're not going to have any of your warranty data with you. But we're just going to unbox this, and you'll see we've got a little plastic thing here with our, I'm guessing, stickers and manual and warranty and stuff. Don't need that. And in the side here is our CPU. There's the sticker. And that's actually quite heavy. Anyone who's building a system for the first time will realize that it's actually quite heavy. And I'm able to hold this, it's not an issue, it's in a plastic casing. Don't press too hard because there are delicate pins there. And so, yeah. The last thing that's in this box is the heatsink and fan to keep it cool. And that box is empty now. And we won't be opening this until after we've installed the CPU, but it's there for when we need it.
Does that come with heatsink paste?
Yes, it should do. Generally, the stock ones do come with heatsink paste. We're going to have a look here. Yep, you can see it there. Try not to touch that because if you touch it, you have to put new stuff on because the oils from your skin can impede cooling. Now to install our 2200G processor with inbuilt Radeon graphics. So we're going to get a thumb underneath this plastic here and peel open the clamshell. I'm going to do it on the table here so I don't drop it. And that's our processor fully exposed. So you want to pick it up by the edges because there are many, many pins there. Try not to drop this because even blowing on the pins can bend them. So you'll see on the processor there's a little gold triangle there, and that helps you line it up because you can only put this in one way. And you'll see on the board somewhere in one of these corners, there it is, that is the direction that it has to go in. So the processor triangle and the triangle on the board have to go in the same way. Generally, the way the writing is on the CPU socket will also indicate it because it will line up with, or 9 times out of 10, it will line up with the writing on the processor. So to put it in, you've got to lift up this little arm here. You may have to put it to the side a bit, and you'll see the socket moves a little bit back and forth. And you may, if you have a keen eye, see little gold landings through there. So this exposes them. And you grab your processor, you line it up and drop it in. Give it a little wiggle to make sure it's in, and stick the arm back down. And that's the processor installed. So next is the heatsink and fan, and it's been about 12 months since I've done an AMD heatsink and fan. But from what I remember, you have to take off these brackets for the old style cooling system that they used. So I'm going to grab out a number 2 Phillips bit, which looks like that one there. Put it on the end of my driver. If you don't have a ratcheting driver like this where you can swap the bits on, just any number 2 Phillips, and it is recommended that your bit is magnetized. So I'm going to lock this, and I'm going to take off these mounting mechanisms. I'm actually going to unlock it so I can do this. And these are decently tight, so make sure you have a grip on the sides of your motherboard so you don't spin it off the box whilst you're doing this. And what I'm doing here, see the magnetized bit, make sure I don't drop a screw onto any one of these delicate traces on the board, like that. And there we go, that takes off the old style mounting system. You see you've still got these posts here. That's what the heatsink fan screws into. And I believe you don't have to reuse these screws. I believe the heatsink and fan has its own screws that you use for it. Now generally when you're tightening things in a computer, you want to go in a cross pattern, so one corner, then the opposite corner, and all the way around in even pressure, so you don't crack your CPU or anything like that. But when you're taking things apart, that doesn't matter. So there again is the thermal grease. Now, this cable here has to go to this 4-pin fan header on the motherboard here. So I'm going to try and find a way to orient that where it's going to look good. Now, I think I'm going to go this way. I'm just setting this down here so that this cable doesn't interfere with the RAM modules. See, because if I went this way, it's going to be butted up against the RAM sticks that are going in here. So I'm going to go this way. And unlike Intel heatsinks and fans, AMD can only go 2 out of 4 ways because it has a rectangular mounting setup, as you can see here. You see some of that thermal grease came off there, that's fine. Whereas Intel has a square mounting system, so it can go on in any of 4 directions. But that doesn't matter, so I'm just lining this up here, and it can be a little tricky. But once you get it, you generally know that you've got it. So you want to get a screwdriver in here and just start it. Then go to the opposite corner and start it again. This is going to be quite difficult to see. I'm actually going to try and do it with my fingers to begin with. Let's have a look here. Something's not right. Like I said, this can be tricky. Just take your time and you shouldn't have any issues. I'm actually going to undo that first one. And try and pull this heatsink off. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Might only let us put it on one way. Or it might just be a quirk in the manufacturing of this particular motherboard or heatsink. It may have just had a slight inconsistency. So I'm going to tighten it with my fingers to begin with, if I can. These aren't easy to get a grip on. I'm just going to start at like 1/4 of a turn. That's better. And these are spring loaded, so they are a little more difficult to turn than something that isn't, but now that they're in correctly, it's quite easy to tighten this. And like I said, you just want to put even pressure and go until they stop. You don't want to wrench it down. You're not making anything air or water tight. So just keep going slowly, a few turns at a time, until they're snug. This one's making a noise. I think, yeah, it's just a plastic bit crimping at the bottom. So all of those are snug. And I'm just going over them one more time. Once they're all snug, you don't really have to go on a cross pattern to check if they're snug, but it's a good idea to do so. Not that I did it then. And that's the heatsink fan on, and then you just want to plug this 4-pin connector. You'll see it's keyed, and so is the socket. I'm going to make sure that says CPU, which it doesn't, but it's the only white one on the board, so I'm going to wing it and hope that it is. And this is another... There we go. That's probably one of the hardest bits to do in a computer, especially when they're closest to the RAM modules, because it is kind of hard to do it without, like to slot the connector on without bending the pins. Now we're going to install the RAM. So, like I said, I've never used this set of RAM before. Generally, I stick to the Corsairs, the Kensingtons, Samsung when they made it. So, this is Ryzen branded memory, I've just found. And generally, if you're building a Ryzen based system or an AMD based system, you'll want to get memory that has been validated, just because they have been known to throw issues when booting. So, what we're going to do, it's much like the CPU, it's a clamshell packaging. And you can grab the RAM by anywhere on the heatsink that's on it. If you have exposed RAM modules, try grab it by the edges and try not to touch the gold fingers here. I'm not touching them, I'm touching the heatsink here, but try not to touch the fingers that are there. Now to get it out of the packaging, bend the packaging, not the RAM. You'll be surprised how many build videos I've seen where people bend the RAM to get it out of the packaging. And you'll see it's got all the information about it there. It's not really useful to us, but the RAM is keyed, so it'll only go in one way. So that little notch there will line up with the little key that is inside the board here. But before we do that, we need to unclip these modules here. Some motherboards have it on both sides. This motherboard only has it on one. The reason they do this is because if you've got a video card here, unclicking these can interfere with the card and then you can't get your RAM out. So, having no clips on this side does make it a little harder to install because you don't know if it's in the full way on that side, but it helps you with your video cards. So it's kind of solving a problem by making another problem. But yeah, it's something that you just got to live with. So we want to line up the RAM and we're going to sit it in the track, and if you had a keen eye, you'll notice that I went to put that in the wrong way. You'll see that that notch doesn't line up. So it's going to go that way. And you put the RAM in the track. These are 4 gig modules for 8 gigs in total. You line it up in the track. You double check that the notch lines up with the key. You seat it in. And then you grab your 2 thumbs and put even pressure on both sides until you hear 2 clicks. And you can double check by doing it again. It's 4 gigs installed, and we grab the second module, line it up, slide it in, double check that it's in, grab your 2 thumbs, click, click, and double check them both. That's 8 gigs of RAM installed, and that is the motherboard prepared to go in the case. So now we're going to put the motherboard to one side here, and on the back of our case here, you'll see, oh, this is a very light case. There are 2 thumb screws on this side. So we're going to undo them as far as they will go. It seems like these ones want to stay in. And because this case has like a bow on both sides, we're actually going to take out both the panels. And to do that, you just pull and away. That's one panel off. I'm going to set it aside if I don't catch my microphone. Make sure that's still in properly. And then I'm going to grab the other side here. It's the same way. They come off really easily. That's going to go back there. Now, you could put those in your box that your case came in with a bit of foam either side. Basically, get them out the way so you don't kick them over or scratch them or something. But yeah, so this is our case. You'll see that it already has a 600 watt power supply already in it, which is good. That was part of the deal that we got with this Black Friday sale, sorry. And if you're looking for the power cable for that, usually it's in your drive bay here. So I've just pulled that out, and there we go. So you'll notice in this case we have one exhaust fan. It looks like a 120mm. We have our 5¼ inch bay up here with what looks like to be 2.5 inch bays down here, just down there. And there's 5¼ inch up the top. On the flip side, we have 2 more 2.5 inch bays here, as well as a heap of cable routing room. And basically, and the drive cage, that's what I was meaning to show you there. 3.5 inch drive cage for your desktop hard drives. And lastly, our motherboard tray here. So that's the main part we're going to be using. But firstly, I've just seen these, which is a twist tie. And you don't want these in your system because they contain wire. And if the plastic that's around them wears over time, that wire is exposed and it can short stuff out. So if you see any of them in your system, get them out as quick as possible. Now, I've never used one of these trays here before, but there's always a first time for everything. So we're going to see how this works. So I've taken out the thumb screw there, which was a bit tighter than I would have liked to have been for a thumb screw, but can't complain. And that's a drive tray there. So you're probably wondering, where's all the mounting hardware? Well, all the hardware that you need for your case comes with the case. So all your screws, sometimes even zip ties, which it looks like we got here, comes with the case. Usually it comes in a box. This case came with a bag, which isn't an issue. It just makes it a bit difficult because we need to find the specific screws that are required for the SSD here. So what I'm going to do is just grab one of each screw and try and thread it in with my fingers. Failing that, putting it on the tip of a screwdriver and trying to thread it in that way. Because you'll have a set of screws for your hard drives, and it looks like it's those ones, the round ones with the fine thread, which is what it usually is. But yeah, so that's the screws we're going to be using. Round screw with the fine thread. They're generally used for optical drives and stuff like that, but they're fitting the SSD, so we'll use them. Those screws there with the hexagonal head and the coarse thread, they're for your motherboard and your power supply. This bit here is really cool. That's a Phillips and flathead to 5mm socket adapter, and you would use that for these standoffs here, and that's a riser standoff by the looks. Oh no, that's a... Okay, so that standoff there is different to a standard standoff, being that it has a raised thread in it, and I'm assuming that's for the center of the motherboard, so you can line it up without putting a screw in and it will stay there, which is a good design. But yeah, that's all the screws by the looks of it that we have. Different cases will come with different types and different amounts of screws. So just check. It's not going to hurt anything if you try thread a screw in. Don't force anything, of course, but you're not going to have many issues otherwise. So, drive cage here. Something you'll want to figure out before you install your SSD, or something you'll figure out right away, is that it can go two ways. So which way do you put it in? Well, your SSD has two connectors there for your data and your power. And if I put it in this way, you see it mounts in that way, I can't put a cable into that connector there. So we're going to mount it that way. Therefore, I can get the power and the data in. So you'll notice that the screw holes line up. They did that on purpose. That's how you mount it. You can also do it from the side if you wish. How tight is that going to be? I'm thinking we do it from the side unless these screws poke out, which it looks like they do. I'm going to try it anyway. If not, I just take them out and I put them in the bottom. The reason I'm not trying to put them in the bottom, even though it looks like it will fit, is because this is how it mounts to the case, and I don't want the screws to interfere with that. I'm sure the designers didn't make it that way so that it would interfere, but you never know. So, like the CPU fan, I'm doing opposite corners and I'm not tightening them down straight away. So, like then, that hole, you can see that hole isn't lined up. So the reason I didn't tighten it down is because that hole hasn't lined up, and it allows me, because it's not tight, to line it up properly, like so. So I can get the other screws in. So, now that I've explained that, I'm going to chuck the other three, if I can, chuck the other three screws in and tighten them down. Now an SSD, it's got no moving parts. Most of you would have seen the videos where you can throw them, you've seen people throw them across a basketball court or through a room, and they still work. They're basically, short of running a truck over them, they're basically indestructible. So, 2 screws is enough. I've built systems where we've secured them with double-sided sticky tape. I've built systems where they're just hanging. Basically, the reason I'm putting 4 screws in is for the sake of doing this right. And yeah, there's really no reason to put 4 screws in. I'm just doing it because. And like the CPU fan again, I'm tightening them down until they're snug or until they stop. Nothing in here has to be watertight. So I'm just tightening them like that. So now that that's done, we're going to slide this back in like that. And you see it hangs there. Then we take this thumb screw and I'm going to put it on the screwdriver again because my fingers are a bit big for this case. And there we go, until it stops. That's the SSD installed. So next, we want to get these cables out of the way, and I'm actually going to untie this again. How long do we have left? 8 minutes. Should smash it out. Can you give me a signal when we've got one? So I'm going to take all these front panel headers and connectors, and I'm going to chuck them through this bottom hole here, just for the time being, because I'm going to lay the case down. And the only reason I'm pulling these through is so that I don't pinch them anywhere. So, now that the case is laid down, you'll see we've got another header here for a fan, which I'm going to untie the twist tie off it, because remember we don't want them, and just droop it over. So, this is what I feared, and this is why they gave us this little 5mm hex, or 5mm socket to Phillips head adapter, is because there are no standoffs installed in this case. Now you see there's a little etching on next to each standoff. So we've got here A/M, E/ATX, so that's for extended ATX. M, I'm guessing, is for micro ATX, like this motherboard. A would be for ATX, which is the general standard full-size board. So I'm not going to take any chances because motherboard manufacturers like to do their own thing, especially Gigabyte, I've found. This is an Asus board, but the point still stands. I'm going to set this motherboard in about where it's going to go. And I notice it's got 1, 2, and then 1 offset. 1, 2, 3 in line, and that's it. So 6 standoffs in total, which correlates to 1, 2, and the 1 offset, and 1, 2, 3. So this one and this one that are labelled with an M, we're not using. And actually, I'm going to double check that again, because I have a feeling, yeah, see, we're not using the bottom one labelled with an M. So we're going to grab our standoffs, and I'm going to grab this one with the post first. Your motherboard may not have this, or your case, sorry, may not have this, but I'm going to put this one right in the middle, because that's going to help us line up our board. And these are ridiculously easy to cross-thread, so just take your time with them. They also don't have the best threads, so I'm just going to put one standoff in every hole that we found that we needed to use, and have none where we don't need them. So if I can line this up. And the reason we use standoffs is so that the board does not ground out against the back of the case, because you could secure this board directly to the back of the case. A lot of older cases did that. The reason we don't do that anymore is because, well, like I said, we don't want anything grounding and shorting out against the back of the case and destroying a computer. So I'm trying to get the 5th out of the 6 standoffs in. And it's not looking like it, so I'm going to try a different. Yep, that one's in. And looks like we got 2 of the raised standoffs. Don't know why they gave us 2. We really only need 1, but that doesn't matter. Now, the main issue with these standoffs, like I think I said, is making sure we don't have any ground under the board where there isn't a hole for them to go. So now I'm just going to tighten them down as tight as you can get them, because, without stripping the thread, of course, because this, when you undo your motherboard, you don't want to take the standoff out with it. So yeah, like I was saying, the main thing with these standoffs is making sure you don't have one behind the board that doesn't have a mounting spot. It's okay to have them out here around the edge of the board, that doesn't matter. But if your case has them pre-installed, make sure there's none near or none under the board that aren't being used, because that's just going to cause a lot of issues. And the last one, you may need a 6-inch extension for your Phillips number 2 for this. I'm getting away with it, just barely. But there we go, that's the standoffs installed, and just have a quick feel, make sure they're all flush with the bottom of the case. And before we put the motherboard in, we want to grab the I/O shield, unpackage it. How long do we have left? 2 minutes. Okay, keep it going. And you'll see the I/O shield. You can line it up against the back of your board, but I know that the audio ports go to the bottom of the case and the PS2 keyboard mouse ports go to the top. So it goes from the inside into this gap we've got here. And this is quite difficult to do. Chances are you will cut yourself whilst doing this. But it's just a friction fit, and there's little posts around the edge of the shield that you've just got to click in. And it's quite difficult because you'll get one corner in, but not the rest. So I think I just got 2 in. And you see I got 2 in, but they all fell out again. And just give it a quick press all the way around. You want to make sure it's the whole way through. And that's our I/O shield installed. Now you'll see it's got little grounding tabs here. You want to make sure when you put your board in that you don't have one of them sticking into a USB port or something, because then you have to take your whole board out, and if you've wired everything in, that's a heck of a pain. Now we're going to install the motherboard. So, grabbing the motherboard by the heatsink and the edges, the back plate, something like that, make sure you touch your case first. You'll want to line it up with the ports on the back of your case. Generally, I like to go in on an angle here because it's just easier that way. And you'll see I'm checking that the grounding straps aren't making any issues with the USB ports. Like this one here, I'm going to bend upwards because it's going inside a USB port. And this one for safety, I'm going to do that too, because they throw the most issues. These ones here, these little ones, are generally okay. It's the ones on top that usually have the most issues. So, lining this up, checking that nothing is fouling on it. Like something is here that I'm trying to figure out. Like I said, don't force anything. Generally, if something's not fitting, something's wrong. And the last thing you want to do is scratch up the bottom of your motherboard with standoffs. So, I'm trying to figure out what is wrong here. It's the one here on the DVI. There we go. And we're going to click the motherboard in. No, something's still having issues. There we are. So the motherboard's in, and because we used that little tab there, it's holding the board in place. So now we're going to use the coarse threaded hexagonal head screws on the motherboard. So I'm going to start with this center one here. You just want to start them. In this board, starting them is not as much of an issue because the board's not going to shift around with that post in. But it's a old habit, and that's generally just how computers have been built for the last 10 years or so. So, or 10 years at least, I should say. I'm just going to do it the old way. And you'll see that I'm not going in a cross pattern. It's only because I'm starting them. Once I'm tightening them, you'll want to go in a cross pattern. So I'm going to tighten this one all the way down. And once it snugs up, just turn it till it stops. And now I'm going to the opposite screw on the opposite side of the board. That's good. Now this one down here. This one top corner, and finish off with the middle ones. There we go, the motherboard is installed. Now's the tricky part, wiring. So, the first one I'm going to do is this chassis fan here, and it's a 3-pin header. You can plug 3-pin fan headers into 4-pin ports and 4-pin fan headers into 3-pin ports. It doesn't matter. 4-pin fan headers just give you what's called PWM control, or pulse width modulation. It's basically a finer control of the fan speed, whereas 3-pin fan headers are strictly voltage controlled. So I believe it's 5, 7 and 12 volts, or 7, 9 and 12, something like that. So that's This fan here can only be voltage controlled, even though we plugged it into a 4-pin header. It's a 3-pin plug. So, yeah. Next, I'm going to undo these power supply cables, like so, and I'm going to droop them over the edge here. And generally, the one that you start with is the biggest one we've got, which is the 24-pin or 20 plus, oh no, this is a straight 24-pin. Generally it's 20 plus 4 because back with the older motherboards, it was a 20-pin connector and they added the 4 later on. But this can only go in one spot, and that's down here. Clip goes to the little latch. It'll only go in one way, and you just, a little bit of force, that's the most force you should ever put on something when building a computer, and that's in. Next is a 4 plus 4 pin connector, and you've got to watch out because there are 4 plus 4 and 6 plus 4, or 6 plus 2, sorry. And you've got to make sure that you're getting the right one because some motherboards have an 8-pin CPU connector, supplemental CPU connector, where this one has a 4-pin. So you've got to make sure you get the right 8-pin if your board has an 8-pin connector. Anyway, say this is a 4 plus 4, you can use either of the 2 4-pins here. Doesn't matter, you just bend one out of the way and you find the clip and you plug it in, like so. Now, after we've validated that the computer works, we'll want to tuck this out of the way. We'll want to fix up all our cabling. But I'm just going to tuck this wherever it goes for the moment because we'll fix the cabling off camera. Next, I'll explain the last few connectors on here. So first of all, this is a floppy connector. It's 4 pins. We barely ever use this anymore. On the other end of that, we have what's called Molex. It's another 4-pin connector. It's a bit larger. That is still quite commonly used in peripheral devices like LED lights and stuff like that. That is the old style hard drive connector. If you've been working on computers as long as I have, you would have used that for hard drives back in the day. This one was replaced with SATA for hard drives. This is fairly common on supplemental devices like LED lights, like I said. Not as common as I would say Molex is, but SATA is more common now. That's for newer hard drives. And the last one I want to show you is the aforementioned 6 plus 2 pins. They're for video cards. So I've got 2 here. There may be a third. I can't really tell. 6 pins is for your more lower power video cards. You'll have 8 pins for your mid-range, and then you'll either have 6 plus 6, 6 plus 8, or 8 plus 8 for your most powerful video cards. I think the most I've seen is an 8 plus 8 plus 6 on one of the very high-end AMD cards from a couple years ago. But generally, most of your video cards only have 2. And that's all your power connectors explained. And the rest of these connectors here, you'll see we have, is that USB? That's USB 2, USB 3. So you'll see that USB 3 is a much bigger connector than USB 2. HD audio has the same connector as USB 2, but a different pin out. That's also the same connector as the older style audio, which is called AC97. Like I said though, different pin out. And then finally, we have like our power LED, hard drive LED, reset switch, power switch, all of those. So we're just going to plug those in and I'll show you where they go. So the easiest one to start with is probably USB 3 because you're not going to confuse that. It's this big connector here. It's keyed, so it'll only go in one way. They still haven't put a locking mechanism on this, which baffles me because this connector will come out really easily. There we go, that's in. Doesn't lock in, so if you pull that hard enough, it will come out. Next, we're going to do USB 2, which generally is right next to it. So right here we have, USB 3.4, USB 5.6. I'm guessing there's a USB 1.2 somewhere. I can't see it, so we're just going to put it into USB 3.4. Actually, no, we'll go 5.6. And you'll see the key, there's a blocked out pin there, so it only goes in one way. You just want to line it up and push it on. This one also doesn't lock, but it's got longer pins, so you're not really going to have an issue of that falling out. Audio connector, like I said, same connector as USB 2, but it's got a different pin blocked out, so I'm just going to go under here, and I assume it's this one here next to the COM port. Yep, it's this one here. Line it up, make sure it's the right way, and press it on, like so. Lastly, we've got these connectors here, the last four, which is your hard drive LED, your power LED. Actually, there should be a fifth one. There it is. Your power switch and your reset switch. Now, it is on the board there, which ones you have to do. So, otherwise you can grab out your motherboard manual. So we've got power LED, positive and negative on the top 3 pins. No, top 2 pins by the looks of it. So we're going to put that on. And if you get these the wrong way, the LEDs, it just won't work. It won't break anything or anything like that. Switches can go on either way because it just bridges the connection. And I'm struggling here because I've got really big fingers. There we go. That's one on. Nope, I missed. It's the second one on. This other one here is the power switch, and I believe that goes next to it. Yep, power BTN is what's labeled on the board. Doesn't matter which way that one goes on as long as you get it on. Reset is next to it, and hard drive LED is under the power LED. So I'm going to put that on that way. And then reset, doesn't look like it matters which way it goes. There we go. So the connector's done. The last thing we have to do is wire up our SSD, and then this computer's ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to find a SATA power lead from this mess, preferably one that's on an end, if this power supply has one, which it looks like it does. Oh, yep, there we go. There's one. I'm going to chuck that through the back here. Bring it out here. And, oh no, it doesn't have one on the end. I pulled a Molex connector through, and I can't actually. So this connector, you'll see it's L-shaped, and it'll only go on one way. So I'm going to chuck it on like that. Next, we'll need to grab the SATA cables that we pulled out of our motherboard box and open them up. See, it comes with 2 SATA cables. One's got an L connector on the end, or a right angle connector, and one's flat. I am going to see, which way does the L connector go? It goes the right way, so I'm going to put, if I stop catching my microphone, the flat end towards the SSD, and it's the same shape as the power connector, just smaller. It's got an L-shaped connector, but this one locks. So I'm going to plug that in, and it might be easier to go through from this side for some cases, such as this one. There we go, it clicks in, and then this L-shaped connector, I'm going to put, it doesn't matter which SATA port. Generally, I put it on SATA 0 because that's the order that your motherboard checks. But because this one's right angled, I'm going to put it there. That may change later though. And now this computer is ready to go. It's ready to test fire. And then once we've validated that, we've installed Windows, everything like that. We tidy up the wiring, put the side panels back on, and it's ready to use. So yeah, thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed. Please don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.